we have a high performance coach sitting in front of me. He's a business mentor. He's the author of Let Love In, golf enthusiast, as you might have heard before we started. Jake Kauffman, thank you so much for joining the show.
Mason, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So I think, we've had a lot of conversations throughout the years. You came on the podcast. For anyone that's listening right now, go check out the first one. But, what's been new with you and kind of what's been new in life? Like, how you been? How's everything been going?
Man, it's been good. It's been tough. So I actually had my house burned down in California on Thanksgiving. So not even 2 months ago.
Wow.
Which was, tragic. And so I have an incredible amount of empathy for all the people who are losing their homes in California. Thankfully, it wasn't my primary residence. And so I didn't experience what it was like to get displaced because I did, get to go back home, which was great. But, it's a special kind of suffering and pain that I've never experienced. But I will say, and I was talking to a dear friend about this last night, because he asked me, like, what was your first instinct after you learned about the fire and after you learned that your house burned down? And I was like, well, because I've done an incredible amount of work on myself personally, which is now reflected in the work that I do with my clients, I said, I'm toggling between, these two tensions. One is having a very human experience where I'm connecting with these emotions of loss that's bringing up, sadness, frustration, because the fire was started due to negligence. And so there was a lot of frustration and quite frankly, anger at the people who started the fire.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, incredibly happy they're okay. It can be rebuilt, but nevertheless.
Rental property?
Rental property, yep.
Okay.
Have owned it for around 4 years. But it was a really special place. I've hosted several retreats out there for clients. I've hosted clients one-on-one out there for in-person VIP immersions where we go really deep for a few days, map out their upcoming year, for example. And so I really loved hosting people up there because it was a really special place up in the mountains in California, San Bernardino National Forest. But nevertheless, I was having this very human experience while simultaneously connecting to the reality that this is grace too.
Yeah.
Which takes a lot of practice. And, this isn't a pat on the back, for me necessarily, but I think the more we work on ourselves and the more we dive deep into our personal development and cultivate emotional intelligence or emotional resilience, which is absolutely a practice, the more we can say yes to everything, including trial and tribulation, because we begin to realize that God does his deepest work in seasons of struggle.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was stepping into the fire and dancing between both of those tensions. That is, this really sucks. And I'm really sad that I'm experiencing this loss, and I'll never get to experience it again. We've celebrated, my partner, Carrie, my girlfriend, Carrie, we've celebrated 2 of her birthdays out there. We've hosted her family. And so we'll never be able to do that again. And simultaneously really connecting to gratitude for the fact that although I can't see it in this moment and these emotions are overwhelming me, I am going to choose my perspective in this moment that says, this is grace too.
Yeah. And that's powerful because it takes a lot of work to get to that point, to be able to flip a situation on its head and be able to look at it from a different perspective and say, control what I can control in this situation. Obviously, it was negligence on somebody else's part. You can't really control that, but how can I turn this into a positive when I'm feeling all of these emotions that, the bitterness or the anger, those things could drag you down, as opposed to
big time
finding a different way to view things. It's hard to do.
It is. It's technically referred to as dual awareness, psychologically speaking, and it does take cultivation. It does take practice. It's not something that you can just decide you're going to be good at all of a
Right.
sudden, you know. And we do this in various ways through spiritual practices, whether it be meditation or breath work or any contemplative practice.
Mhm.
But it allows us to hold two opposing views simultaneously while giving both equal weight.
Mm.
And that's really difficult, especially for the ego to do, because in that space is tension. And the ego doesn't like tension. It doesn't like to be uncomfortable. It wants to preserve the status quo, right? And therefore keep us inside of our comfort zone. And, you know, not to get political whatsoever, but given the season, you know,
Yeah, of
given
course.
given
Of
given
course.
that you know, Trump was just inaugurated a
Yep.
few days ago, this has become incredibly prevalent in this season, given, you know, people's political point of views. Because what do most people do? They simply look for confirmation bias.
Mm.
However, consciously or unconsciously that occurs.
Yep.
That's pretty much what the vast majority of people are doing, is seeking out confirmation bias in order to reinforce their current perspective and worldview. And what that does is it absolutely limits our ability to grow and to become more informed,
Mm.
smarter, more emotionally resilient individuals who are capable of greater things,
Right.
whatever those greater things are to you, right? Whatever your goals may be, because we're not open to entertaining the opposite side of the spectrum with curiosity and openness, right? And so that's what keeps us in this divide. Yes, the system inherently is divisive, but on an individual level, like, what can we do, practically speaking, to change ourselves and evolve personally in a way that allows us to move beyond the system that we find ourselves in? It's to practice dual awareness. And that's tough because the ego doesn't want to do that. And it's
Right.
going to inherently push back against it.
Yeah. You made a good point on saying, the system inherently is built for this division. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about when I hear you talking about our confirmation bias,
Yep.
we look at social media
Mhm.
algorithms. How are they built? They're built to keep you on the platform. How do they do that?
Correct.
They feed you what you interact with. And I'm sure a bunch of other things on listening, your phone listening to you talk, like all these
Yeah.
things. Believe it or not, this is happening.
Yep.
So it's constantly around us, this confirmation bias, right?
Correct.
And
Yep.
down to the people that we, spend time with. And I've seen it time and time again where it's like the political divide of families
Oh,
or the political
sure.
divide of friends.
Yep.
And, you know, not to virtue signal, but I feel like I've always been kind of in that place of how do I see both sides here? Because everybody's life and their perspective on life is built through their experiences, which are unique to them.
Correct. Yeah.
So how can we meet in the middle here? And at the end of
Mhm.
the day, if what we want is a more united country, a more fair country, sure, there's going to be some topics that are a pretty firm line for most people, which is fine. There's times where we can agree to disagree.
Yeah, 100%.
But how do we find that median of, okay, we need to come together and create something that's bigger than ourselves?
Mm.
That's the hardest part, right? The
Yeah.
bigger than ourselves when we're inherently selfish humans.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because, you know, and again, this isn't really a political conversation.
Right.
It's really much more an emotional intelligence conversation from a macro perspective around how can we, you know, be the change within ourselves that we seek from others
Right.
and that we want from the world. Because when you actually talk with most people, you find out fairly quickly that they align on most things.
Right.
You know, everybody wants a better life than they grew up with.
Yeah.
And that's largely what the American dream is built off of.
Right.
Unfortunately, you know, what has happened is that as a society, we've really started to reward victimhood.
Mhm.
And I won't go into the history of that because it's not that important. But what this looks like, and we see this very prevalently through the censorship of social media and news media over the last, especially over the last 3-4 years, right? Behind the guise of like misinformation and fact checking, which started with Trump, in his first, election.
Fake news.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Right.
The phrase fake news.
Of course. This is not promoting one side or the other. It's just, it's taking a macro look at what is going on and how is media in general shaping our perspective and therefore our human experience, because that's what guide and directs our actions and our decisions is our perspective, is our worldview, which is heavily influenced by social media, as you alluded to, because what are they showing us? They're just showing us more of what we want to see and also hear. So it's not encouraging dual awareness. It's just encouraging more of the same.
Yeah.
And growth inherently cannot happen in that place.
Yeah.
And so it is this cruel irony of like, yes, this is what I want to see and consume. But at the same time, in order to grow, I need to challenge my current perspective. And that's hard to do. So what has come of all of this censorship and fact checking and whatnot is the over-validation of people's feelings. Because yes, your feelings are valid. They are real. Going back to my experience of the fire, right? The emotional human experience I was having was very real.
Right.
However, fear and anxiety, for example, or as an example, will absolutely lie to you. They will absolutely lie to you when it comes to, for example, what is safe or what is appropriate. So one of the big distinctions that I'm encouraging or inviting my clients into, because there's this conversation, especially online, around like, oh, I don't feel safe. And I'm always very quick to ask, okay, do you not feel safe because something inappropriate is occurring, or because this conversation is inviting you to be vulnerable? Because those two things are very different, but the felt impact on the nervous system is largely the same. And if we can't distinguish between those two things, divisiveness is just going to continue to occur, because what typically tends to happen when someone says that, right, the over-validation of that person's experience without challenging it, without bringing it into question. It's not that we're opposing how they're feeling or making them wrong for how they feel necessarily.
Right.
So I can validate someone's experience while simultaneously inviting them into seeing it in a different way. And that is where compassion can take place. Because, what do we see in society? It's largely shutting down of anyone who offends anybody. You're just, because the ego, it just wants to be right. It's like, this is how I feel, and I want to be right about that.
Yeah.
I don't want to, and that's a lazy way of going through life. Truly, it really is. It's like, but I don't want to challenge. I don't want someone to challenge me in terms of how I feel, and I certainly don't want to challenge myself, because that's uncomfortable. And the ego hates losing, even to God.
Yeah.
And so, but that's really the only way that we can grow is be open to seeing things in a different way.
Yeah, the word awareness, right? Like a lot of these concepts and things that we're talking about comes back to awareness.
Yeah.
And I know to get to the point of having these thoughts and opinions for both of us probably was, a very long, strenuous journey of a lot of mistakes and things that we did to open our eyes to this. But that takes time for you to actually, one, be aware of it, which to me, that's the first piece of, starting on this road of, self-development or whatever that might be, trying to be a better person, expanding your awareness, being able to see a dualistic approach, and then make calculated, educated decisions that aren't based on ego and that are more so based on, one, what you believe in and what you stand for, and two, where you can meet people where they're at. It's like both, like not being able to be bent
Yeah.
by society or other people's beliefs, and having a strong moral background while also having empathy to meet people where they are.
Right.
And that's the hard part, right? Because
Yeah.
like you said, it's uncomfortable to one, admit that you're wrong, or
Correct.
change your belief, or say, I said this yesterday, but
Mhm.
today I think I feel differently about it. Like
You're right.
that's like a crime against humanity if you change your mind
Oh,
these days.
big time. Yeah, you're alienated very quickly, and you're
Yeah.
made out to, be someone that you're not. When in reality, it's like we should actually be applauding the open mindedness that comes with, for example, and this might offend people, but you know, I've heard it said before that if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't really have a heart.
Right.
But if you're not conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain.
Yeah.
like, and this is coming from someone who actually kind of like went through that journey.
Yeah.
And I lived in California, my late 20s, early 30s. And I still find myself to this day, very
Yeah.
socially speaking, very liberal.
Yep.
Excuse me, to a degree, because I think that can become an incredibly slippery slope, especially when we start, rewarding victimhood.
Right.
But nevertheless, we should be applauding those people because it's like, no, you're actually inviting in growth. You're actually challenging yourself to look at the world in a different way, and that's difficult to do
Yeah.
because you are going to alienate people in that process, or you're very likely to. But the beautiful part about that is you're going to find out who your real friends are really fast.
Yeah.
Right? Whether they're able to tolerate your growth. And the reason that most people can't, is because your growth on some inherent level is threatening or intimidating to the other person's ego. And if they can't separate themselves from their ego
Mm-hmm.
and approach it in a neutral perspective, right? My ego is a part of me, but it's not the true me. So I can't get rid of it, but I can certainly make peace with it.
Yeah.
And I would almost go so far as to say, most importantly, recognize it when it's running the show. And you talked about the importance of non-dual thinking.
Yeah.
If you ever find yourself in a dualistic conversation or point of view, you can pretty much rest assured that the ego is running the show in that moment, right? Either or, good or bad,
Right.
this or that, as opposed to this and that. And that's where we have a bigger conversation around the system that we find ourselves in, going back to
Right.
what we were talking about before, that is inherently divisive and kind of designed to keep us divided, as opposed to seeking common ground. Right? So it keeps us trapped in this dualistic mindset, as opposed to encouraging us to break out of it, right? Because the ego hides in the mind. And it's, when you look at scripture, it's actually what Jesus in the Gospels was inviting us to do, right? His
Yeah.
first recorded words were metanoia, which if you open up a Bible today,
Yeah.
it would say repent, but that's not actually an accurate translation. It technically means new mind.
Mm.
That's the literal definition of
Wow.
the Greek word metanoia, new mind, right? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which can only happen through openness and curiosity, and I would say empathy.
Yeah. There's this thing I heard from Dispenza the other day talking about the effects of
Yeah.
neuroplasticity in the brain, right? And how we're always wired as humans to seek comfort.
Yep.
And when we start challenging our ego or these beliefs that are inherently subconscious to us, whether we know it or not,
Yeah.
our brain instantly wants to kind of tuck in, go back to
Yep.
the comfortable.
Yep.
But when you start feeling that,
Mm-hmm.
you start feeling that pressure in, like you said, in your chest, or you start feeling
Mm-hmm.
that confliction.
Yep.
It's a point of, okay, do I push past this confliction, dig deeper,
Yep.
do one more rep,
Sure. Yeah.
Finish the marathon,
Yep.
have the hard conversation,
Mhm.
forgive that person in my life, forgive myself, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
if you push past that, that is when neuroplasticity actually happens. Your brain is
Mhm.
physically changing,
Yep.
and dopamine is then released after that.
Yeah.
That's why you feel good after a workout or after you get the weight off your chest and you actually have that conversation with that person.
Yeah.
So it's that wall that you feel yourself
Yeah.
coming up against
It's the
that
burn.
really will change your life. But we get to that wall so many times and we retreat because,
Mhm.
again, our ego gets in the way.
Yep.
Our inherent human nature gets in the way, where
Stories. Yeah.
things happen that repels us off that.
Mhm.
But again, perspective, right?
Yep.
Your house burning down, that you're up against this
Mhm.
wall of confliction and all these emotions and things that are coming where you could be inherently,
Yep.
you know, mad, angry at the people, you know, all these types
Yep.
of things that you could hold on to instead of looking at it from that different direction. So I've found that when you get to this sense of awareness, right, that takes
Yep.
time to reframe the way that you look at the world.
Mhm.
But when you get there and
Yep.
you've opened up your awareness, it also opens up a ton of other challenges,
Yeah.
right?
And
Because
opportunities.
challenges and
Yeah.
opportunities are one and the same, right? But for
Yep.
me, I'll give you a personal story. So on this road of being able to have awareness and see things from a different perspective and
Mhm.
self-actualize and transcend, as you like to say,
Yeah.
I never in my life was an anxious person,
Sure.
ever. Was always extremely outgoing and
Mhm.
optimistic, and I still carry that to this day, right?
Yeah.
But I remember the first time as I was going down this road that I
Yeah.
felt felt anxiety
Sure.
or like an anxiety attack or something, right? Like you're feeling this.
Mhm.
And that was a struggle that I then dealt with even more as I continued to go down this road.
Yeah.
I was drinking less, I was creating better habits, I
It's
was
great.
doing all of these things, but I was
Yep.
dealing with this thing that like
Yeah.
then as I
Mm.
opened up my awareness, like it started creeping back in. So I'm like,
Mm.
what is that? And like, how can people, when they start going down this road, realize that
Mhm.
there's going to be challenges that you're faced with and
Yeah.
the road gets harder, you know?
This is a good question. So there's a 3-step process that I invite my clients to walk themselves through and really to start to adopt in their everyday life, which is, what's the thought? How do I feel or how do I react when I think that thought?
Hmm.
Who would I be without that thought? And what would I do
Right.
from that new space? Because typically what we do as humans, this is kind of naturally, when we think a thought, we just assume that it's true, or we
Right.
react from the space of that thought.
Right.
What takes practice, and this is why all of my clients are encouraged to meditate, is we think a thought or we experience an emotion, and then we react from the space of that emotion. And that's what creates breakdown, but it's also what keeps us where we are,
Yeah.
because we're just constantly reacting to the world around us. And by virtue and as a direct extension, operating as a victim to circumstance. What is
Right.
much more difficult and takes cultivation is being what I would refer to as, a victor of your circumstances, or having power over your circumstances, which says, okay, I am thinking this thought. In your case, okay, I'm anxious because somewhere in there's a story
Right.
or a thought that I'm having about my life, work, my relationship that's causing me to feel anxious, to feel this, pressure in my chest, tension in my shoulders,
Yep.
whatever it may be. And I'm overwhelmed. And typically what we do is we see it as something that needs fixing, something that needs to be solved for, as opposed to listened to and embraced. Because really I would suggest that it's your psyche, it's your spirit, it's your body, your intuition trying to tell you something.
Right.
And when you start to listen to it, what typically ends up happening is the anxiety starts to decrease. And it may not be something specific. It may simply be that, hey, what you're about to do is just too much, too soon, too fast. Whatever it is,
Mm.
that risk that you're about to take is it's too big, right? Because we do want to take risks. We want
Right.
to encourage it. That's how we grow. But we want to do it when it's stretchy and doable, not straining or debilitating. So you think about physical fitness. We have to stretch the muscle in order for it to grow. We have
Right.
to apply tension, but we don't want to strain it. Strain it is to invite in injury, and that is when things become
Right.
counterproductive, right? You're putting too much weight on. You're trying to increase the load too heavily beyond your current capacity. So we want that uncomfortable. We want to invite that. Um, but we don't want it to be too much too soon too fast, because that is the literal definition of trauma, is anything that is too much too soon too fast. And so when we can learn to embrace life in that way, as a practice, well, that's when we can really start to achieve the more ambitious goals that we have for ourselves,
Right.
while simultaneously listening to our body, because our intuition speaks to us through how we feel in our body. So when you have anxiety, you know, as a blanket statement, sure, it could be this thing that you get to push through or move beyond, in the spirit of like, one more.
Yeah.
I think Ed Milet recently released a book. I haven't
Yeah.
read it yet, admittedly, but I've heard great things. So there's something to be said for that. And then there's also something to be said for, really listening to, okay, how is my body responding in this moment based on this action that I'm about to take or this decision that I'm about to make?
Yeah.
Because if it's straining or debilitating, my suggestion would always be to take a step back,
Yeah.
not to move forward, because that's when we risk straining things.
Yeah. And I think a lot of ambitious people can relate to that, right?
Yep.
Because we're often hardwired to go, 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 go. We're
Right.
driven by this idea that hard work, is and pushing past those limits
Yep.
will equal our desired outcome.
Right.
And it's hard, like I had
Yeah.
mentioned about the podcast, being consistent over 4 years,
Yep.
to stop, take a step back,
Yep.
retrospectively, not how I was feeling in the moment, but doing that for an
Yeah.
extended period of time was
Mm-hmm.
actually a net positive.
Yeah.
Um,
There's something to that.
and you have to, that's something I'm still trying to understand how to believe and not feel that I'm being counterproductive when I'm resting. Like rest is part of the work, or these types of things can be different for anybody, right?
Well, muscles grow at rest.
Right.
Inherently, what you're saying is 100% true, which is that the more we invite in discomfort, the quicker we grow. Practically speaking, however, what is oftentimes the side effect to that? And I say this because I work with a lot of men who this applies to, which is that it ultimately causes us to be addicted to stress or anxiety in order to get things done.
That's good.
What often tends to happen is they struggle to slow down, they struggle to rest, they struggle with sleep, right? Their nervous system is literally, it's become addicted to intensity. And when that happens, what does that increase? It increases the need to either escape or cope.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden your need to escape or cope becomes a direct match or a direct reflection of the amount of anxiety that's living in your system. And so this is why I have a lot of hyper successful men who make a ton of money or who run very successful businesses, which is awesome. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Yeah.
But they cannot bring themselves to slow down, and they don't know why. Or they reach the next level, they accomplish the next achievement, and they're like, why do I still feel the same way?
You're
Right.
numb to it at that point because it's an addiction.
Right. And
That's the definition of it, right?
correct. Yeah. But it's the thing that we've become addicted to but don't realize.
Right.
Right.
That's the worst part.
Correct. It's kind of like inflation. It's the tax that you don't see. It's the tax that you don't see. It's the addiction that you're not aware of. Obviously something like drinking or smoking or something very outwardly external is very easy to recognize and say, okay, I probably should cut back.
Yeah.
But stress, right? It's kind of that more sinister, hidden, unnoticeable thing. But where do you typically tend to experience it? It's, man, I think I might be burning out. Or, you're on vacation and you can't unplug, or you can't you
Relax.
can't relax.
Yeah.
You're on the beach and you're like, why can I not, put my phone down or disconnect from like my racing thoughts? And that's really where you start to notice it. Or why can't I be fully present with my kids? You know, um, I hear men talk about this all the time, and I've experienced it myself,
Yeah.
where you go to play with the kids and you set your phone down and you start to feel a little anxious. You're like,
Mm.
what is going on? And you realize, oh, it's because I have this lovely little device in my hand 10, 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
Or I'm in front of a computer screen 10, 12 hours a day.
Mm.
And we're not wired to work that way. We really aren't, because it actually has us, it causes us to be in a sympathetic nervous system state for far too long, which is fight or flight.
Yep.
And because of that, we're constantly practicing it. And what happens with regard to what we practice, we always return to that.
Yeah.
So when we go on vacation, or when we try to, take a day off,
Which is a small part of
Big time.
90%. This is 10% of the 90. The
Correct.
habits in the 90 are going to go over. Yeah.
we always
absolutely.
return to what we practice.
Yeah.
And so it's this thing that we've begun to practice without even necessarily realizing it, that's come to dominate our life, and therefore our inability to rest and to truly savor and enjoy the fruits of our labor.
Mm.
And if that's not a special kind of hell, I don't know what is.
That's true. That is true. I definitely can relate to that in a lot of ways. I mean, Lex and I just got married, went on our honeymoon, 2 weeks in Greece.
Amazing.
I told myself before, because I have struggled with this exact same thing of being present,
Yep.
I need to fully unplug, like let myself do this,
Yep.
like just unplug. And I did a really good job. I definitely still felt those times of I'm not being productive,
Correct. Yeah, sure.
anxiety of some type. Like,
Yep.
oh, what am I missing? What am I
Mhm.
not doing?
Yep.
I'm driven by this
Yeah.
desire to, accomplish, achieve,
Yep.
right? Which, like you said, innately not a bad thing,
Right.
as opposed to being lazy or other types of
Of
things that could
course.
happen. But
You can get a lot of things done in that space.
exactly,
Yeah.
but it's not sustainable, and it's not ultimately, like you said, you don't want to be playing with your kids and thinking about work. Like
Right.
that to me, exactly like you said, sounds like a living hell. You mentioned meditation,
Mhm.
but what other ways can we kind of combat this natural thing? Most people that are listening to this at this point
Yeah.
will say, all of you are high performers. All of you
Sure,
want
sure.
to accomplish something.
Yep.
You're 45 minutes into a podcast
Yep.
about it. So most of the people that are listening are going to be able to relate to this. So how and what are some tools
Yep.
that they can start incorporating in their life, or maybe thought process or things
Mm.
that will allow them to be more present
Yep.
outside of their high performing habits and jobs and things that they're doing?
Sure. So, and this is where we get into the nuances of the both and conversation,
Yeah.
right? Which is, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
You should have goals,
Right.
right. Or, you should have seasons of life where you're striving towards something. I think Andrew Huberman has done a lot of work with regard to, what keeps people motivated and thriving.
Right.
And part of that is striving towards a goal, or
Absolutely.
seeking to accomplish something. So we don't want to get rid of that entirely, but we do want to create what I would suggest is some sobriety, right, to it. First of all, I think it starts with the understanding and the realization that what you're actually seeking on the other side of a goal accomplished, it's already available to you right here, right now.
Mm.
Because nobody just wants more money. They want what more money can do for them,
Yeah.
and therefore how that will then make them feel.
Yeah.
I want more money so that I can buy this house, so that I then can feel happy or at peace.
Right.
I want that job promotion, or I want to, reach 7 figures in my business, so that I can then experience or feel fulfillment of having reached this goal that I've been striving toward for years, potentially.
Right.
So we're all just chasing a feeling. That's it. So when you realize that and you connect with that, the question then becomes, how can I cultivate that now? Because happiness isn't in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Joy and peace and fulfillment, it's not in the future. And yet we have, however unconsciously or unintentionally, we've bought into that notion. All you have to do is look at our actions. And what do our
Right.
actions say? It's that my happiness is somewhere else. And that's totally a game that the ego plays, is trying to cultivate or create a more idealized version of the self or one's life in order to be or feel something happy, fulfilled, joyful, at peace. And that's what actually induces suffering.
Mm.
Because we're constantly moving the goalposts, or we're constantly kicking the can down the road on our happiness, because what ends up happening when we achieve that goal, it's not there. Because what have we been doing? We've just been saying, well, it's somewhere else. And so all of a sudden we get that thing, whatever that thing is, we get the relationship, we get the promotion, we, accomplish the financial goal, and it just keeps moving.
Yeah.
And that's a special kind of suffering. It really is to achieve something incredibly meaningful to oneself, but being unable to connect with the fulfillment that ought to come with it.
Right.
And so what we need to do is first and foremost realize that what you're seeking in the future is already available to you right here, right now. Abundance is already here. Happiness is already here. Fulfillment is already here. It's just a matter of connecting to it and creating the circumstances that I need in order for me to access it. Right? This is why golf for me is such a pleasure. It really is.
Yeah.
Because it is a tangible, practical way in order for me to practice being present. Because, if you're not present while you're golfing,
Shanks.
you are not going to play well.
Yeah.
And you're not going to enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
And so it really is a practice in being present. And the more present I am, the more I open myself up to being able to access the peace that is inherently available to me in this moment. And so, you started this conversation by asking me how I'm doing and what's new with me. And what is present for me in this moment, beyond the house fire,
Yep.
is no longer waiting for the future to be better than the present.
Mm.
Because that is such a pipe dream.
Right.
It has us continually chasing, but never abiding. And if that's not something that I think we need to be taught in our culture, in our society that is so wrapped up in accomplishment, success, achievement, and looking good, right?
Right.
Social media, that's what it's all about for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Is people kind of presenting this idealized version of themselves. And I've fallen into this myself. But that's really where my work is these days. And it's especially prevalent with clients. And what I've found is that the more you practice doing that, it can be through a game of golf, or it could be playing with your kids without your phone around, or it could be going an entire day without your phone. That's a great place to start, honestly, for most people. And just pay attention and notice how often your mind, how you feel, yes, but how often your mind searches for your phone. That's an interesting one.
You're like,
yeah, 100%. And creating a habit or a practice out of that. One of our practices at home as a family is we have dinner 98% of the time. Unless there's a soccer game or a dance recital or something like that, we have dinner as a family, sitting down around the dinner table every night, no phones, no devices. And I think I don't have any statistics off the top of my head, but there's a lot of research that they've done around the power of having dinner as a family every night. and what that can do for fostering and creating not just connection, but also healthy relationships and a thriving familial unit. But whatever your, you know, drink of choice is per se, when it comes to how you cultivate inner peace as a practice,
Yeah.
as a spiritual practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, whether it's, you know, getting rid of your phone for a day, it can be any number of different things. Breath work is a great one as well. Any contemplative practice. The more we do that, the more happy we become.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, when you realize that that's what you're after in the first place, then you can enjoy life more here now.
Yeah. I think those practices and those tools, like you said, allow you to slow the mind down, allow you to like
Yeah.
see through the constant stimulation that we're all under,
Right.
allows you to switch over to
Mhm.
that parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
It reminds me, went to Mexico and stayed at this little retreat, and
Sure.
they had a Temazcal, which
Yep.
is, for anyone who doesn't know, similar to if you've been in the sauna, except it's a big dome that technically in Hispanic culture would signify like the womb of like Mother Nature, basically. And so you go in there, you're in this big igloo, like concrete shaped hut, and they have boiling water and super hot rocks, and they pour it on, right? So you're in there with some other people, you're sitting on the bench, and then they close the door and it's pitch black.
A little
So
scary.
you're literally taking all of your sensory deprivation out while this hot water is being poured on these rocks, and it's getting hot in there. So you're starting to sweat. And then a shaman is in there and going through chants, and basically there's phases of it where they'll go, 10 to 15 minutes, open the door, etc. So we did that, and obviously no one's on their phones or anything, right? This is an extreme example, but it's just separating yourself from that. So we did that. We come out, and then we do a cacao ceremony. And so it's, by the way, if you have a chance to do this, I highly recommend it. It's like drinking the best hot chocolate you've ever had, but it stimulates a certain part in your brain that's actually associated with love as well, chocolate. It releases these endorphins. And through that, don't worry, I'm getting to the part. Through that, the shaman's leading you through rituals and sound baths and everything, and you're with other people. And so the whole time she's, saying, hey, just whenever we're done with this, we're just going to talk and open up whatever's on your mind. Mind you, we're with complete strangers.
Sure.
And so we start going around the circle, and obviously I feel very relaxed and had just gone through the ceremony and, sound bath and all of this. And a person I had never met before to my right just starts talking about how through the ceremony, he was able to forgive his mom.
Powerful.
And I was like, whoa, I almost get emotional talking about it now. But I just remember in that moment, like, whoa, okay, this is serious.
Yeah.
And it got to me, and I was just overwhelmed with emotion. And my one thing was presence.
Yeah.
Like, I realized that I have a hard time struggling with being present. Yeah. And like we just talked about, always going to the next thing. And inherently, I feel like the things you need to work on, but you don't ever want to take the time to dig deep enough to allow yourself to, one, realize it, and then two, make a difference once you realized it. But I just feel like those types of things, obviously you're not going to go to Mexico and do a Temazcal and ceremony every time, right? But having those things, like for me, it's the sauna or meditation or golf, finding those things is so important to reconnect you back to nature or, spirit, God, like the thing that's beyond us. And that's,
that is us.
That is us. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's just important to be able to pull yourself away from the hustle and bustle all the time and be able to reconnect to us to God, to, you know, that thing that's way bigger than us. Cause I refuse to believe that, this is it. Right. And I believe in God. I have faith. I believe Jesus died for our sins and all those things. So that is what drives me. But I still think if people that are listening are not there yet, that's
Yep.
totally fine. I think we can all understand and realize there's something bigger than us.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it really feeds into the question, which I think everybody on some inherent level is asking themselves, which is, how can I create a better life for myself? But most people just don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
They go into what they know, whether that's doing more, working harder, which is really just, it's an egoic answer to the question of how do I improve
Right.
truly, because we know that working harder, it only gets you so far. At a certain point in time, you need to have leverage. You got to start working smarter,
Right.
which from an interpersonal perspective looks like shifting your perspective in a way that moves you powerfully forward. Whether that's because we all have these stories, these self-limiting stories that hold us back from greater growth. And so when we can access the deeper recesses of the mind and optimize for not just our ways of thinking, but by extension, our ways of being, well, that's when we can really create a significant change that's going to be sustainable. It's not going to be this, New Year's resolution type effect where, we have these really great intentions and, maybe we even set some or establish some clear goals for ourselves.
Right.
But, by March 1st, I think the stats show that over 90% of people
Right.
are
The gym is a little bit quieter.
a lot quieter, man. A lot quieter. Yeah, I think stats show that over 90% of people are off track to accomplish their New Year's resolutions at that point. Because you can't optimize for a behavior at the level of behavior. You got to go deeper than that. And I think that is so perfect when it comes to the essence of this show, which is talking of matters of deeper substance.
Right. We've talked a lot about, interpersonally, how we can shed some of the layers of our subconscious patterns, beliefs, the tools that we can use to be able to reconnect back to source and us. But there's a big piece of this that I feel like COVID exacerbated, but we all kind of knew. We are built for human connection.
Big time.
And, a big part of that, I was watching Brian Johnson's Netflix interview. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but go watch this on Netflix documentary. This guy had actually been following him prior to this. Super successful tech entrepreneur, sold his company for 10 figures, whatever it was, set himself up for life. And through all of this, had a divorce, was unhealthy, was unsuccessful on all the other areas of his life, which, we've talked about even today. Very unhappy person after this, but very wealthy. And so he started to basically decide, okay, I want to start taking care of myself, and got obsessed with being able to extend human life.
Longevity.
Yeah. And so now this is what this documentary is about, is him with this ultra regimented to the farthest extreme, because his goal is to basically see how long he can live.
Sure.
So down to the amount of rest, to the exactly what he eats every single day, the type of exercise, all of these other type of biological enhancements that cost millions of dollars, right? Because he has these resources. It's the extreme. But it's very interesting watching this, right? Because as a guy that's living by himself, going on this mission that's obviously touching a lot of people, I'm sure you're getting some, external validation and connection to a community from that. But he had lost relationships with his family and his son. His son came back into his life.
Cool.
It shows how strong that bond, and you can just tell watching how important that was for him to have one of his kids, kind of come back into his life. And there's a lot of other things behind it. You should watch it. But what really stuck out to me was like, okay, this guy can optimize for anything
Everything. Yep.
on a personal health basis and have the best biomarkers and be
Sure.
50 and his biomarkers are a 23-year-old.
Yeah.
But this connection,
Mhm.
as his son goes to college or whatever that
Yep.
is such a big part of not only our quality of life, but also really our health. Like it's
Yeah.
so, so important. So how can people find that?
Mm.
Because earlier you said, you know, when you're going through
Yeah.
changes, you start separating yourself
Yep.
in these categories of life.
Mhm.
And as you're accelerating and
Yeah.
other people around you aren't, it's
Mm.
very hard because sometimes it can even be family or your closest friends.
Yep.
So how do you kind of one deal with that friction of being still a part of someone's life or maybe not being a part of someone's life and
Yeah.
then finding this tribe or
Sure.
these people that can help, you know,
Mm.
you on your goal
Yeah.
that you're moving towards?
Yeah, that's a really tough one that a lot of my clients deal with because the healthiest person in a in a family is often going to be the one that creates the most tension because they're interrupting the historical unhealthy dynamics that built up and made up the family system. So you're going to have more conflict.
Yeah.
It seems like a paradox or like this cruel
Right.
irony that like, okay, I'm working on myself to try to improve. I'm getting better, and yet I'm creating even more tension within my family, and that's normal because you're interrupting these historical patterns that have made up the family system, but also other people become threatened or intimidated by your growth
Mm.
because their ego wants what? Their ego wants to keep things the same. And
Right.
you're striving for growth. So there's going to be this inherent friction or rub there. But that's one that I admittedly I've even struggled with my own family is meeting them where they're at and simultaneously inviting them to change, which is that's a difficult balance because I do think on some inherent level, I do believe that love corrects, for example, especially in the presence of a safe relationship when there's consent, say with, your spouse or with, an accountability partner, which a lot of my clients have. Um, or if you're part of a church, right? There's
Yeah.
an inherent level of accountability that comes with that relationship, or at least there should be.
Right.
Otherwise, we're just kind of co-signing on each other's toxic behaviors,
Yeah.
and not challenging growth or inviting growth. But at the same time, I think true love, to a degree, accepts people where they're at. So it's this both and conversation where it's like I can love you for who you are, while simultaneously wanting more for you, especially if I know that it's in alignment with what you want for yourself.
Right.
So that's something that I really struggle with. But I think if you're looking to attract a tribe that is growth minded, that is seeking to be better, that has a vision for what they want to accomplish in the world, well, I think you have to become that. You know?
Right.
Um, I think we need to be the highest example of the behavior that we seek in
Mm.
another.
Mm.
And when that happens, or when we become that, we by virtue and extension attract that in other people because we're going to start to say no to relationships that don't fit the mold of what we're looking for in terms of friendship,
Right.
or even in terms of a romantic relationship. Um, and that's where we start to really accelerate our ability to get what we want when we are quick to say no to anything that doesn't fully align with that. Um, because what happens is then what takes the space of that. The universe hates empty space.
Right.
It hates it. It's constantly seeking to fill it. And so when we create space for those relationships by virtue of saying no to relationships that are not in alignment,
Mm.
we make it incredibly easier on ourselves and for God or the universe to say, okay, here's what you want.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I lived in LA, one of my dear friends moved away, and I said to myself, all right, I need a new best friend. And I cannot make this up when
Yeah.
I say that within a few weeks, one of my close girlfriends in LA, she started dating a guy who happened to be from Minnesota, which is where I went to college. And he went to college in the same conference that I did, which
Wow.
was a very small conference. Like it was,
Yeah.
I went to a liberal arts college with like 3,500 people. It was
Yeah.
not a big university. It's not
Yeah.
like the Big Ten,
Yeah.
and it was just too much of a coincidence for it to be a mistake. And we instantly became incredibly close friends. Because that's what my intention was. And so clarity of intention powers everything. So having a clear intention around what it is that you're really seeking, in this case, we're answering the question of how do I attract more of a conscious tribe that's committed to growth, that is going to challenge me to be better, that's ambitious. That's really the way to do it, is start by having a clear intention. And the more specific you can be, the better.
Right.
And then aligning your actions to that intention. That's the magic formula, is tension plus committed action equals results. And so getting clear on your intention, and then, and this is why I think actually attracting, a healthy relationship is so easy. Like a lot of women I hear these days say attracting a conscious man is really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's not hard. You just have to, work on yourself. But the trick is, okay, where are those type of men hanging out? They're not at the bar. They're not at the club. They are, at the rock climbing, facility. They're at the gym. They're going to personal development conferences like Tony Robbins, for example. They're working on themselves. And
Yeah.
so once you start to become that yourself, but you go to places where they hang out, you're going to meet a bunch of them.
Yeah.
They may not be exactly what you're looking for, but you are highly likely to meet some, really quality guys. It's just that they haven't interrupted their life enough to the point of changing their behavior in a way that puts them on the path to attracting that thing, right? So the intention's there, but the committed action isn't. It's like, I want this thing, but I don't want to change myself, and by extension, my habits, my behaviors, where I hang out, who I spend my time with, what I invest my money in a way that puts me on the path to attracting those types of people. That's the hard part.
Yeah. That's the formula. I mean, if we could boil this whole show down and you could just have one episode for 2025, I think that's it. It's intention,
Plus
action,
commitment equals results.
Yeah.
And I would even insert the secret formula, if you will, which is that accountability ties the action to the result.
Right.
If you can bring in a level of accountability within the context of a safe container, whether it be a coaching relationship, whether it be an accountability partner, or whether it just be a spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, you're going to accelerate your ability to achieve whatever it is that you're looking for that much faster, because they're going to challenge you when you don't follow through on what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. That's the bridge, right?
Yeah.
Because again, we need that human connection and we need that accountability. Yeah. That's like priming the subconscious. And that's why I think a lot of people miss on this piece, like meditation, setting intentions, manifestation, all these things. They're great, right? But none of that matters without that bridge, that bridging to the action, right? To that. And that's what these tools allow you to do. It allows you to see things from a different perspective, prime your subconscious to notice patterns, notice if you're thinking about, how am I going to close this deal, or I want to meet this person. You're subconsciously going to be looking for those things if you're meditating on them and you have an intention to find them. Right. Doors are going to open and you're going to notice things because you're priming yourself with the intention to see it. Now, what you do when that situation gets plopped on your lap is sometimes a yes or a no answer, right? Because again, if you have the intention of let's just use an example of getting to 10% body fat or running a marathon or whatever it may be, and you have a craving for Chick-fil-A or Popeyes or whatever your thing is,
Yeah.
you're going to have to say no, and you're going to have to say yes to the other things, right?
Yep.
But I love that because I think saying no opens up
Yep.
this world of opportunity. It's addition by subtraction, right? It's
Right.
opening space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you do with that space that you fill it with is where that intention can drive how you actually use that time that's now opened up by you living a life by design, right? And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love looking at it that way. Do you want to live life by your design, by your means, or are you going to let the world dictate? Because it's one or the two. Like, there is no middle ground. If you have a middle ground, the world is going to drag you around and dictate how you feel, how you
100%.
look, what you make, who you live life with, all of those things.
Yep. And yeah, the new always demands the death of the familiar, and the ego hides in the familiar. And so if we really, really seek to grow, you know, what I would say is, reaching our highest potential, it's a death of many repetitions, which looks like constantly saying no to that which doesn't serve where we want to go. And is there something to be said about analyzing our motivation? Yeah, 100%, because, there's our conscious desire and then there's the unconscious motivation. And most men, because I work with men, what they often find in our work together is they think they're moving towards something when in reality they're actually running away from something. And I couldn't recommend doing that work more, because that is until we redeem or reconcile that come from that motivation, we're going to constantly find ourselves achieving things, or being rich in money, but like, the gentleman in the documentary, poor in happiness.
Yeah. You had a quote where you said, so much of men's ambition is just a proxy for acceptance.
Oh, 100%.
And that one, I was like, oh, okay. We are driven to want to be accepted by other people a lot of the times, even the people that say, oh, I don't care what they think. There's deep down they do.
Yep.
So, I mean, is that something that, like, how do we look at that? How do we look at this desire to want to be accepted?
This is bringing about an even deeper conversation around psychological development, because it was Carl Jung who first really started to talk about and divide life into two halves, the first half of life and the second half of life. The first half of life is all about accomplishment, success, achievement, making something of myself. And you need to play that game. You really do.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of my clients yesterday, which is, you need to play that game so that you can learn how empty it actually is.
Yeah.
Because at a point, you realize that, like, oh, this is all about me.
It's like the Jim Carrey quote. He's like, I wish everyone could be wealthy and famous so they'll realize that it's not everything.
100%. Yeah, totally. At a certain point in time, you need something bigger or beyond yourself to attach your ambition to. Because if it's always about you, that's going to prove to be an empty game as you get older.
Right.
In your teenage years, in your 20s, in fact, there's a lot of studies that show what we're talking about right now really flies over the head of men until they're around the age of 35. So they have to play this, what I refer to as this high performance game. But that high performance game eventually has to fall apart.
Right.
The come from, or the motivation that's driving it, has to change. And in my opinion, that requires healing and transformation, because what drives our motivation in the first half of life, it's to be against, or it's to be not. I am not my dad. I am not, my brother. I am not what my friends said about me. whatever it is, that you're not going to measure up to anything, or,
Mm-hmm.
what my teacher said,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to be super successful.
Right.
And so we go to battle against these things, these negative associations.
Right.
But until we actually heal those negative associations, no amount of success is going to be complete or sufficient. Which is why I do believe that your success is always going to be incomplete and insufficient until you've reconciled your pain. And in that moment, when that happens, that's when the shift or the change occurs, and you're no longer fighting the old, however unconsciously that is happening,
Mm-hmm.
but you're working on creating the new. And that puts you on the path, at least in my experience, because this is what the second half of life is all about, which is a higher purpose and a higher power. It all of a sudden becomes about other people,
Yeah.
giving to others, being of higher contribution to humanity. It's no longer about your personal salvation project,
Yeah.
as Thomas Merton, the old monk, described, right?
Yeah.
So in the first half of life, most of men's heroic projects it's really just an overcompensation until we begin that transformational healing journey within ourselves. We're going to continually find ourselves stuck there. And I think that's where a lot of men in our society find themselves. And I hear this from women all the time, which is that you have a ton of 15, 16-year-old men, but in 35, 40-year-old men's bodies,
Yeah.
right? Where they constantly have something to prove or something to protect, right? They're posturing. And there's like an energy about them, right? And we confuse that with ambition, with drive. But when you dig beneath it
Mm.
and you look at the unconscious motivation residing underneath it, you're like, oh, this is really just insecurity that
Mm.
they have yet to fully work through,
Yeah.
in a way that takes the focus off of them, off of looking good. And then, okay, what can I do to utilize my gifts to be of highest service to others?
Yeah.
It's a very different come from, and it's also a very, very different energy, because when you do that, you can really relax into not just who you are, but what I would say is the natural flow of life.
You become magnetic in that.
Big time.
You can bend the world. There's a lot of people who have bent the world at their own will, right?
Yeah.
At the expense of a lot of other things in their life.
Yeah.
You hear this story all the time.
Yep.
My first job was at a company called Arthrex. We sold medical devices for orthopedic surgeons. So knees, ACLs, had 2 of them myself,
Sure.
shoulders, totals, those kind of things. And I remember going to a conference for like our sales kickoff or whatever it was, where we got to meet the founder of the company. He was speaking, and then he did a open forum where you could ask questions. And I asked him the question of, you've built this $1 billion plus revenue private company that's helping a lot of people. For someone who's, ambitious to have, that kind of impact on the world and build that kind of thing, what would you say? And he said this. He goes, in front of all of my peers in that class, he said, "Don't do it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What?" And he's just, as straight faced as possible. Don't do it. Like all the things that I've lost to get to this point.
Yep.
He was like, "You have a good job. You should just enjoy it."
Yeah.
And then I was like, you could hear a freaking pin drop in that room.
Yeah.
And I sat down and I was like, that's pretty, like everyone was coming up to me after like, he's such an asshole. I can't believe he said that to you. But I thought back like, wow, this guy's probably lost family and like all these other things, his health and like that, to build something that of course has helped a lot of people, but the response was so visceral and quick and stern. It was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. Most men are driven to the degree that they struggle to be present.
Yeah.
The founder of NVIDIA actually said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And you know, NVIDIA is one of the top performing companies in the stock market.
Right.
You know, it has been for several years now. He said the exact same thing in an interview, essentially, which was, you know, would you do it all over again? And he goes, absolutely not.
Yeah.
He goes, people don't
That's
realize,
pretty crazy.
right? People don't realize A, how hard it is, and B, you know, what it costs you. And so when you look at that, I mean, even Winston Churchill, 100 plus years ago, talked about this, that the most ambitious, accomplished men actually had very unhappy childhoods. And so it's really a crushing reality um, to think about, you know, that here you have these outwardly incredibly successful men, and we see it all the time. What's the highest demographic for suicide? It's white males between the ages of 18 and I believe 35. You know, a demographic that has more opportunity than any other generation in history. And obviously that's shifted a little bit with inflation and you know everything over the past several years, but nevertheless, you know, it's absolutely rampant. Anxiety is at an all-time high. Prescription drugs to treat depression at an all-time high. I believe 1 in 5 men report having no close friendships. It's it's staggering. Um, but our ego insists on playing the game, and we need to. There's nothing wrong with that. Like a
Right.
16-year-old boy on some inherent level needs to prove himself because he needs to know that he can earn dad's love, that dad will be proud of me. But because we don't have really solid elders in our communities, and because we don't have male initiation as an embedded practice within our communities, men don't break free from that. They don't break out of that. And so so they reach their 30s, they become 35, 40, and they're still playing that game because they haven't been initiated into this paradox of life that invites us on this further larger journey that is not about our own success and achievement. It's not about you know, accomplishing something so that I can make something of myself. But it's about what I can do to improve the lives of other people.
Other people.
Yeah.
I think at this point we will know some of this answer, but
Yeah.
it's a question I love to ask as we wrap up. What is your definition of success?
I'll give 2 answers to this question. I think happiness in many respects is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal that isn't attached to necessarily your success or achievement. Now, that can be a natural side effect or byproduct of that. But the focus is on the progressive realization of that worthy ideal. And then the other thing I would say is how you feel sitting in silence in a room alone.
It's a good one.
Because I do believe that most of men's problems come from his inability to sit in silence in a room alone. It is by far and away the hardest homework I ever give my clients.
Yeah, that's powerful. I guess we have, for all the guys listening and girls, that's a good place to start. We're
all after a feeling.
A lot of things. There'll be a lot of feelings and things that can come up when you give that space.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's when you are forced to confront who you really are.
Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's number 2. I mean, we'll obviously have to do it again.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
I was looking back.
It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been at least 2 years. I think it was episode 115 for anyone that's wanting to go back and look. But
awesome.
Yeah, it's
great conversation.
It's absolute pleasure. And where can we find your book, and where can everybody find you and the things that you're doing, or if they want to get involved with your coaching?
So my book, Let Love In, The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts, by Jacob Kauffman. So my full name, Kauffman. You can find it on Amazon. Otherwise, the best place to interact with me, follow me, consume my content is on Instagram. I am Jake Kauffman.
Awesome. Jake, it's been a pleasure.
Bro, thank you so much.